Hey guys, it's Israel Salom here again, coming with a good little video. So across the years, over the years, I've encountered this prophecy. It was on. I only was able to find it on one video on YouTube, and it was kind of a unknown video. The view count was like 200,000 back in 2015 when I saw it originally, and it stayed at 200,000 since then. So nobody really has watched it since then. I kind of kept track of the views. I remembered it, but basically, it's like a mathematical prophecy that undertales the Jewish diaspora, like when the Jews left Israel, they got kicked out by the Babylonians, and they came back in 1948 and formed their own state. Um, that was actually very prophetic, and not in terms of just saying that they were going to do it and that it happened, but that there's a there's numbers involved. You can do mathematics on it. It's not just gematria where you take like names and add a number to the name. It's way more literal than gematria. It's very, very powerful. There's only one other prophecy in the Bible that is as powerful as it, and I haven't made a video on that yet, but that's coming up in part two. So let me just get into the meat and bones of this real quick. So the video that I pulled this from was it's called the Bible, the Word of God question mark extraordinary aim claims demand extraordinary evidence, and so obviously like hold on, gotta hit my vape. Daddy needs his juice. So anyway, this video is like super powerful. Um, you can watch you can watch it on YouTube. Let me open the hyperlink. Words. And it starts off here. See it? This is what it's called, and it stayed at about stayed at about 200,000 views. Um, and it was like free gospel track, free CD tracks. Um, but uh, but yeah, like there's a link to there on for YouTube. So what I wanted to call it was like a few things here. I kind of settled on this one, and part two is coming out in I don't know. I mean, at this rate, it's coming out in a few months, but hopefully I can get it out quicker than that. Um, I want to make part two really good, and it's the Christian version. So this right here is the Jewish version. So like, if God is real and He revealed Himself to a group of people, the most likely candidates would be of the Abrahamic faith because they predominate. They as a percentage of humanity, like they're like over 50% of the population of humans believe in the Abrahamic faith. And so like if God is trying to reveal Himself and isn't secret, it's going to be one of those three religions. You got Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so like I'm not gonna sit here and say that basically I'm not trying to prove anything other than that God came from the Jews and then revealed Himself to the Christians also, and that the God is chose the Jewish people, but that the promises of God also underline Christianity, and so that'll be part two. So part one is why God chose. I'm sorry, why the Jews can claim that they are God's people, and they can do it prophetically. So here we go. First prophecy is in the video. It's referenced at timestamp 31, and so on here it would be right here. Like in here, it talks about it. So you can just pull that up and start playing it. But the guy talks really slow. You want to play him at like 1.25, 1.5 speed. Otherwise, it's going to take forever. Um, but anyway, it says Jeremiah says Babylon will conquer Judah and bring them in captivity for 70 years. And so we see that reference in Jeremiah 25, verses 8 through 11. And basically saying that, uh, behold, because you haven't heard my words, I will send and take all the families of the north, said the Lord, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land and against the inhabitants thereof, and against all these nations round about, and utterly destroy them, referring to the Jews, and make them an astonishment and perpetual desolations. So people will look at the Jews and be like, God can't possibly come from those people. Um, and he said, "The whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations, the Jews, they had Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. Talking about those two nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years." So God told Jeremiah that the Jews are going into exile for 70 years. And so this was fulfilled historically. And I'm getting all this off Wikipedia, and you can get it off other internet sources, but I chose Wikipedia. Even though Wikipedia isn't great for religion, it's very biased against religion. I still chose Wikipedia because it's everybody knows about it and it's the best source right now. Uh, so so this event was fulfilled historically in 606.4 BC. So point 4 is like the spring. So like point 8 will be like starting in the winter months. So point 9 would be like November, December, that kind of thing. So we have the siege of Babylon. Sorry, the siege of Jerusalem by Babylon occurred in 606.4 BC, and so it's kind of detailed. Like there's going to be some math involved, but we take 70 years and subtract it from 606.4, and we get 536.4 BC. And so, what happened in 536.4 BC is when the Jews were allowed to return home. Cyrus, in the Cyrus cylinder, there's like, he sent out, not just the Jews were allowed to rebuild their places of worship, but other religions were also. But it's special to the Jews because they were allowed to return home. And this was fulfilled in the book of Isaiah. So I should have added that in here, but I guess I didn't. But so only a small remnant returned. The rest voluntarily stayed in the Babylonian Empire or were unable to return for some reason. Now, Jeremiah and Ezekiel knew each other. According to Wikipedia, Jeremiah lived from 650 BC to 570 BC and died in Egypt. And Ezekiel lived from 622 BC and lived to 570 BC and died in Babylon. And so Ezekiel and Jeremiah, they were contemporaries. They knew each other. And so that's important. So when Ezekiel's getting Baruch or whoever wrote was one of his like scribes to write down. It might not have been Baruch. I don't remember. But Ezekiel was writing his book. And one of the prophecies he got was that he's told to lie on his side, and every day that he's got to be on his side, that's a year of sin punishment for the nation of Israel. So he was told to lie down for 390 days for the kingdom of Israel, and then 40 days for the kingdom of Judah. And it's a day for each year. And basically, like, once the siege happens, the countdown begins. And so God started the countdown for Jeremiah's time whenever the siege happened. And so Jeremiah was told that it would last 70 years, but Ezekiel was told that it's going to last 430 years because you have 390 years plus 40 years, which is 430 years. So God was confirming to Ezekiel what he told Jeremiah, but also adding to it. So that's important to know. So we have a punishment until the Jews are allowed to come back home lasting 70 years because God promised Judah 70 years until they came back. But their total punishment was much longer, 360 years longer than just 70 years. So the total punishment was 430 years. You get 390 plus 40. So they served 70 years in Babylon and were allowed to come back. So that's 360 years remaining. So when we take the date of 536.4 BC, which was when they were allowed to go back and rebuild the temple, it's in Nehemiah, during Nehemiah's time. They got a book called Nehemiah, and that's recorded there. So when we take that and subtract the remaining years, this should be BC. We get 176.4 BC. So nothing historically significant happens when the punishment is over. And so, like, you'd be like, okay, case closed. Like, God doesn't exist. Like, the prophets were wrong. Like, what are we doing here? But this is where it gets interesting. So there's four verses in Leviticus that all say the same things. They're identical verses. And they say that basically if Israel doesn't repent, they would have seven times the punishment. And I say basically, like they literally are like verbatim all saying the same thing. It's kind of weird. I don't know why God would say the exact same things four times, I guess to drive the point home. And I mean, as Christians, like we don't have to worry about these kinds of punishments because we're not under the law anymore. So this only applies to Jewish people. Um, so they didn't repent as usual, and so that's one interpretation. Okay, and I'll get into the other interpretation later, but this one is the most obvious one. So we're gonna get 360 um, years, times it by seven to get 520 years. Now, an ancient calendar was always 360 days because they just took the lunar cycle, which was 29 to 30 days, and multiplied it by the month. So that's 12 months. So you get like 360 days. Um, and so I was able to like find some Wikipedia articles on this. So you got the Hebrew calendar, you got the Babylonian calendar, and the lunar month cycle calendars, and they're all 360-day calendars, guys. Like there's no like conspiracy or whatever that it's that they were using modern day calendar lengths. So I want to say the Emperor Constantine or Justinian, somebody like that, changed the calendar from 360 days to 365, and then we added a leap year to account for the difference. And so you're just gonna have to like do the research on your own, but it's legit research. So we cannot consider the years that they're giving to be 365.25 days. We have to consider that the years they're giving are 360 days and convert them into our modern calendar years. And so this is where the math comes in. But basically, like you can do the math and get 907,200 days of ancient calendar days punishments, ancient calendar day for the punishment. And when we divide that by 365.25 days, we get a year that we can place on our calendars. So that's 2,483.77 years. And so I just rounded it up to zero point 0.8. So 2,483.8 years. So there's no year zero in the Gregorian calendar. We must add a historical year to account for that there's no year zero. So it goes from 1 BC to 180. Like there's no year zero. So when we take negative 536.4 BC and then add it to add our years that we calculated, we get 1947.4. Now we got to add an extra year to get to account for the missing year zero, and we get 1948.4 AD. So if y'all know history, in World War II, we know that after World War II happened, there was like an international plea for a place for the Jewish people because like the Holocaust, they didn't have a place to go that was safe, and so like the U.S. and Britain gave them Israel, and so once they got there, they established a state, and they did it a few years after World War II ended. Um, yeah, 3 years after World War II ended, and it says in here there's a Wikipedia article on it. It says May 14th, 1948, the day before the expiration of the British Mandate, David Ben Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency, declared the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel to be known as the State of Israel. And so, like, prophetically, we get these math formulas basically of date conversions and then adding up the days of their punishment. And we get the end result is the year that Israel becomes a nation again. It's pretty spot on. I mean, to the give or take a few months. So there's one issue with this. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, it has an issue. Is that why weren't the 70 years from Jeremiah also multiplied by 7? So if we were to multiply those years by 7, we would have come to the date of 24, 31, and that was when the punishment would have been over if we also multiplied the original 70 also by 7, because we only multiplied the 360 by 7. We didn't multiply the 430 total year punishment by 7. And so like there could be two possible reasons for this, is that during this time period the Jews must have been sorrowful and repentant. We see that they wrote the book of Lamentations, Daniel, Esther, and others. They survived a genocide in the book of Esther and didn't forget their culture. Um, and so Haman was this Babylonian dude that was trying to eradicate the Jews. And in the book of Esther, they were able to fight against it, and they all like rallied around a Jewish flag, and they didn't just give up their faith, and so that they were still like considering themselves Jewish and not Babylonian, so they didn't forget God. So although most of the Jewish people, okay, this is what this Wikipedia article says about this, is that although most of the Jewish people during this period, and this is after the Jews were allowed to return. So after the 70 years were up, the Jews were allowed to return. And then it says, although most of the Jewish people during this period, especially the wealthy families, were to be found in Babylonia after they were allowed to return, the existence they led there under the successive rulers of the Achaemenids, the Seleucids, the Parthians, and the Sassanids, um, Sassanians, Sassanians were obscure and devoid of political influence. The poorest but most fervent of the exiles returned to Judah, the land of Israel, during the reign of the Achaemenids. There, with the reconstructed temple in Jerusalem as their center, they organized themselves into a community animated by a remarkable religious ardor and a tenacious attachment to the Torah as the focus of its identity. And so, like, the most obvious conclusion is that they were behaving for 70 years as a whole. But once God allowed them to return, it was dependent on if they all decided to return, that the punishment would then be multiplied by 7. And so we see that the wealthy Jewish leaders of society decided to forget God and stay in Babylon when they had the choice to give up their, because wealth back then was determined by like land and stuff. So if they were to all move over to Israel, they would have lost their money. And so like that was a an issue of faith. So it didn't show that they had faith. So like they represented the whole Jewish people, and so they enabled the punishment of 360 years to be multiplied by 7 when they decided not to go back to Israel. So that's the most obvious one, and so that's why the 70 years weren't multiplied, but the 360 years were. So another conclusion is that God gave them Jerusalem back after 70 years as a default promise to Jeremiah, because he specifically said 70. But then he also told that to Ezekiel, but Ezekiel's case, it was a sin punishment and not just a location punishment. So there's a little bit of issue with this second one, but it says that right now there's a lot of Jews in America. Okay, the USA. There's more Jews in America that are legal Jews than actual Israel, and so like you could actually argue that they haven't actually all returned yet, and that but here in America they're not treated like second class citizens, so they're just choosing not to return. But if we were to multiply the 70 years by 7, and add that to 1948 after you account for the date conversion, we would get a year of 2431, and that's a future date from now, and that could be when all the Jews in America decide to, like the last Jew is finally home in Israel. So like this could be a prophecy that has different layers to it. I'm not really 100%, but I am like 90% sure that the fact that you can take the 360 and multiply it by 7 and then get a date that's very significant to Jewish history when they declared a state of Israel, that's very mathematically like improbable. And so like this is one of the most powerful verses, prophecies that I've encountered, and nobody really talks about it because it's new. Like they didn't know about this because it involves different books and having to go back to Leviticus to get a meaning from two other books. And so like there's three different books that are working together. You got Leviticus, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel all working in tandem with each other, to give us this amazing tool. I guess. I mean, it's a predictor. If God's real and He revealed Himself, He's going to be able to tell the future to His prophets, and they were spot on when it comes to the 360 multiplied by seven. And so we still have to wait to see if 2431 is a significant date, and then we can make a determination on if the 70 was multiplied by seven or not. I mean, we have to wait a little bit longer to see that. But right now we have, you know, enough evidence to make a case that this is significant because of the I don't know, it's like slices of a pie that compromise a whole, and it's kind of aligned to 1948 after 2,500 years, over 2,500 years. So it's pretty miraculous. So I'm very happy with this one. Part two is coming out. It'll be about the Messiah revealing himself after a set number of years. So there's something very similar for Christianity. So like, if this is true, why not be Jewish? Because the Christians don't have something like this, but yet we do. So that's coming out in part two, and it's over a few hundred years. Uh, it's I want to say it's a 600-year prophecy, so very similar to this, but not as long. So yeah, I'm excited to share this with you guys. This has been in the back of my mind for years. So peace, Israel Salom out. Love you guys. Have a great rest of the year. We just started the new year.